If you've ever kept a bird in your house, you know what it's like to panic. Someone lights a candle in the next room, the smoke detector chirps twice, and suddenly you're running around opening windows because you heard, somewhere, that birds die from fumes. And that story is true. Canaries in coal mines, pet parrots dropping from non-stick pans, the whole thing. Birds are famously fragile when it comes to air quality. Except they're also not. Pigeons live on highways. Vultures circle above burning grasslands. Geese migrate through wildfire smoke at thousands of meters. So which is it? Are birds incredibly sensitive to air pollution, or are they somehow immune to it? The answer, as with most things in biology, is that you're asking the wrong question. The premise here is a little off, and deliberately so. Birds aren't immune to dirty air. They're selectively vulnerable in ways that are genuinely strange, and the reasons why some air kills them instantly while other air barely registers comes down to one of the most unusual respiratory systems in all of vertebrate life. Once you understand how a bird actually breathes, the whole picture shifts completely. Start with the basics. Every animal with lungs has the same fundamental problem. Air comes in, gets used, and has to come back out the same way it entered. In mammals, that's a dead-end arrangement. The lungs inflate, oxygen crosses into the bloodstream, carbon dioxide comes back, and the whole mixed mess gets pushed out again. It works, but it's not especially efficient. At any given moment, your lungs contain a mixture of fresh air and spent air sitting together. That mixing limits how much oxygen you can actually extract per breath. Birds don't do this. Their lungs don't inflate. They don't even expand. Instead, birds have a system of air sacs, hollow connected chambers that run through the body, through the bones, into spaces you wouldn't expect to find air. And the flow through the system is unidirectional. Air enters, travels through the lungs in one direction only, gets fully processed, and exits. There's no mixing of fresh and stale. The lungs stay at a near constant volume while the air sacs act as bellows, pushing everything through continuously. It takes 2 full breath cycles to move a single parcel of air completely through the system. But what comes out of that process is oxygen extraction efficiency that makes mammal lungs look like a rough draft. This is why birds can do things that seem physically impossible. Bar-headed geese cross the Himalayas during migration, flying over peaks where the air is so thin that humans need supplemental oxygen just to stand still. The birds do it without stopping. Ruppel's vultures have been recorded at over 11,000 meters, higher than most commercial aircraft cruise. At that altitude, the partial pressure of oxygen is so low that a human brain would lose consciousness in seconds. The geese and the vultures are fine because their respiratory system is extracting every usable molecule of oxygen from air that mammals can barely register as breathable. So, back to the original question. If their lungs are this efficient, why does kitchen fume kill a parrot in under a minute? This is where the efficiency becomes a liability. The same feature that makes bird respiration so extraordinarily good at pulling oxygen from thin air also makes it extraordinarily good at pulling everything else from the air as well. When you overheat a nonstick pan coated with polytetrafluoroethylene, it releases a cocktail of fluorocarbon gases. A human in that kitchen might feel a tickle in the throat. A bird in the next room dies before you've noticed anything is wrong. The unidirectional flow means there's no buffering, no mixing with cleaner reserves. Whatever's in the air gets extracted at maximum efficiency, including the things that will kill it. It's not fragility, it's the same system turned against itself. And here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Because outside of specific toxic compounds, birds living in urban environments are actually doing remarkably well in air that's objectively terrible by any measurement standard. Pigeons in cities with serious particulate matter pollution aren't dropping dead in the streets. Crows in Delhi, sparrows in Beijing, kestrels nesting on bridges above 6-lane highways. These animals are breathing air that would register as unhealthy on any human health index, and they're raising chicks in it. How? Part of the answer is physiological. Birds have extremely efficient mucociliary clearance systems. The respiratory tract is lined with mucus and tiny hair-like structures called cilia that beat constantly, sweeping particles upward and out before they can settle deep in the tissue. In birds, this system is remarkably active. Particulate matter that gets inhaled is cleared quickly, often within hours, rather than accumulating over time the way it does in mammalian lungs, with more complex folded tissue architecture. It doesn't eliminate exposure, but it reduces residence time dramatically. Particles that move through fast cause less damage than particles that sit. The structural design of the avian respiratory tract facilitates this clearance process even further. Unlike the intricate branching alveoli of mammalian lungs, where air passages become progressively narrower and more convoluted, bird lungs feature relatively straight-through passages with actual gas exchange occurring in small tubes called parabronchi, rather than blind-ended sacs. This linear architecture means particles have fewer opportunities to settle into dead-end pockets where they might accumulate. Additionally, the air sacs themselves can contract and relax in ways that create turbulent flow, which shakes particles loose rather than allowing them to adhere to tissue surfaces. The mucus coating the respiratory tract also differs in composition between birds and mammals, optimized for rapid particle transport. Studies of pigeon respiratory tissue show that clearance occurs, not just through ciliary action, but through coordinated muscular contractions in the bronchi that physically move material along. The result is a system where pollutants are essentially funneled through rather than stored. There's also the question of scale. A pigeon's entire respiratory exposure per breath is just smaller than yours in absolute terms. Even accounting for how frequently birds breathe, the sheer volume of air cycling through a small bird's system each day is a fraction of what passes through human lungs. Smaller surface area means less absolute deposition of pollution per unit of time. City sparrows aren't thriving because dirty air is harmless to them. They're managing it at a body size where the load stays below the threshold that causes acute damage. The immune system plays a role here as well. Urban bird populations that have lived in polluted environments across multiple generations show measurable shifts in how their bodies handle oxidative stress. Pollution creates reactive oxygen species inside tissue, and those molecules damage cells. Birds in cities have, in several studied populations, upregulated antioxidant enzyme activity compared to their rural counterparts. The body essentially recognizes the chronic exposure and adjusts. It's not a perfect fix, and urban birds do show shorter lifespans and lower reproductive success in heavily polluted zones. But the adaptation is real and it's measurable, built through exactly the kind of generational exposure that quietly reshapes a population's baseline. Vultures present probably the most dramatic case. These birds spend their entire lives in close proximity to decaying organic matter, fires, carcasses in various stages of decomposition, clouds of hydrogen sulfide and ammonia rising off things that would send a human to hospital. And vultures process all of it. Old world vultures in particular, like the griffon vulture, have been studied in areas with persistent open burning, and they're not avoiding the smoke. They're circling in it, using thermals that rise from hot fires to gain altitude. They've been tracked moving through smoke columns deliberately because the thermals are there. The answer isn't that the smoke doesn't affect them. It's that their system cycles through it fast enough, clears particles quickly enough, and operates with enough baseline efficiency that short-term exposure at the concentrations they encounter doesn't overwhelm the clearance mechanisms. Wild birds also don't spend hours sitting inside an enclosed smoke-filled space. The exposure is real, but it's dynamic. They move through it, and then they're in clean air again. Duration matters enormously in toxicology, and wild birds are rarely stationary long enough for sublethal concentrations to become lethal ones. So the actual answer to why birds seem unfazed by dirty air is layered. The respiratory system is more efficient, which helps and hurts depending on the compound. Particle clearance is faster. Body size limits absolute daily exposure. Populations adapt over generations to chronic local pollution, and their behavior, constant movement, high-altitude flight, wide-ranging habitat, means they rarely sit still in one air quality zone long enough for cumulative damage to stack up the way it does in a sedentary mammal. It's not one thing protecting them, it's several overlapping factors that together produce an animal that can circle a wildfire and land safely on the other side. Birds aren't unaffected by dirty air, they're built to move through it. The canary in the coal mine died because it couldn't leave. Put it on a flight path over the smoke, and the story ends differently. That's the distinction that matters. Sensitivity to specific toxins in confined spaces? Yes, absolutely. But out in the open, in the air, they actually evolved to navigate. Birds are doing something that looks a lot like flying above the problem, sometimes quite literally.